Yeah.
Got Kirk choked up here.
And my guess is up.
I've been lamenting my unfortunate choice in footwear today. It's not looking good. All right. How you been?
Okay, look, at least you're going to be sitting.
Get to travel a lot. That's good. Yeah, travel's fun. Well, it depends on where. Look, that's like that. That's I grew up with 3 sisters.
I just saw that and I'm like, that's like a real. And that's a everybody out. You did a good job. Very good. Oh, I bet you did. That's a crew to have fun with.
Yeah, it all worked out. They had gotten there. We ended up taking it. They were like,
Good afternoon. Do we have all the committee members here that came up? I believe so. Okay, Ted Haas, thank you. So I've got 1:30 a little bit afterwards. Chairman Albritton is upstairs. He will be down in just a few. We'll go ahead and get started with SEIB PEEHIP Joint Study Commission. Any committee members have any comments or before we get started? If not, I will call on the Alabama Commission on the Evaluation of Services.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. President Woodrow Wilson once said, when asked how long it took him to prepare a speech, he said, well, that depends on how long you want me to speak. He said, if you want me to talk for 10 minutes, I need about 2 weeks to prepare. If you want me to talk for 20 minutes, I can be prepared in a week. And if you don't want feedback, move the mic out of your face. Can y'all still hear me all right?
I got you, yes.
All right. And if you don't care how long I speak for, I can be ready right now. Well, unfortunately for y'all, I'm not Woodrow Wilson, so despite the fact that y'all gave us 2 months to prepare, I'm probably going to take a little longer than 10 minutes.
Well, I think you've done a great job in the time you had to do this, and I did read it and make some notes there, and then sent you an email, just some clarification. I'm sure some of the members of the committee probably need the same clarification that I needed. So go ahead and let's get started.
We're going to go through all of that. My name is Patrick Dean. I'm the Assistant Director for the Commission on the Evaluation of Services, and I am happy to present our findings and analysis and how we got to those findings and analysis that our team has been working on for those last 2 months, as I mentioned. Here's a quick overview of how that presentation is going to go, because as you've heard before and as you'll hear throughout, while these 2 agencies operate in the same space, in the insurance space, healthcare insurance space, they do so in very different fashions. So we had to do several things to sort of get those closer to analyze, get them in the same categories. And we luckily have systems in place that we can do that. So we use the statewide governmental accounting system known as STARS, where we could track expenditures by categories and do things like that. And I'll talk all in more detail, but all about trying to get it to where we could draw some conclusions, some comparisons between those. So let's just jump right in. And first, let's establish the scope and the scale of what we're talking about. We're talking about roughly $2 billion in annual expenditures. You can see from this line chart here that those lines are relatively flat over the 6-year window. Why the 6-year window? Well, we would prefer to do a 10-year look back whenever doing this and looking at trends and making sure that we can smooth anything, but our government accounting system would only allow us to capture back to 2018. So we were allowed to do 6 full years, fiscal years of expenditures to get this information. I want to explain a little bit about this chart before we move on. You've heard before in previous meetings whether we're talking about flex or not talking about flex benefits and flex boards. And the answer is yes, we are talking about all of it, particularly on that pink line, that bottom line, SEIB, lighter color pink line. That is all expenditures for them to operate the state employees plan, including those flex benefit plans. So we're capturing it all. The other thing is that anomaly in 2019 with PEEHIP where it spikes up. Those aren't true expenditures. That is a revenue adjustment that they had to do where they had to pay back some member premiums due to a lawsuit. So when you take that out, you really have a smooth line. How smooth? Over that 6-year window, PEEHIP has had about a 5% increase in annual expenditures, and SEIB has had about 11% increase. So to put that in better perspective for you, over that same period of time, inflation has been about 25% total inflation. And for medical cost inflation, it's about 15%. So both of these agencies are underperforming those benchmarks when it comes to the increase in their expenses over that time. What does that sort of consistency allow us to do? It allows us to take that down to an annualized number, to an average annual number. Because you don't have significant ups and downs, we can go, all right, we can average this and take that as a trend and look at it. When we do, and we take that average and we dial it in, we can break it into these two components because we understood the ask of this body here to look at the agency administrative costs. So when you take it and you look at it like this, you see those big long bars, that's grants and benefits, that's tied to medical benefits, member benefits of the program. Those little tiny slivers that might even look like legends on the side there are the margins that we're talking about. So in any given year, that's 0.3% of the actual expenses for PEEHIP and about 2.3% for SEIB. Now that's a difference in and of itself, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So as I said before, these agencies operate very differently. SEIB is a standalone state agency, and that is their all-encompassing cost. PEEHIP, from probably its existence, if not for a very long time, has been operated, while it is an independent agency, has been operated much more like a program under the retirement systems of Alabama. And there are likely certain economies of scale that are realized through that relationship, but there's also some unaccounted for costs that are going to be captured at any given time. And there may be reasons for not allocating that cost, and there may be that those costs are so low and the effort to track those costs doesn't really equate to what it would take to actually capture it. But I want to talk about that because that is a distinction that you need to know when you're looking at this analysis going forward. And this is just a quick example of some of those categories. Right, so I just selected 3, and I selected 3 that I wanted to show you for a specific reason. Because as you can see on this chart, on the right side, SEIB's expenditures, they have an expenditure in every fiscal year for these 3 categories, and PEEHIP does not. It's not because PEEHIP doesn't incur cost in those categories. It's because it's not allocated there. Right? That is because of that design, that relationship they have with the retirement systems. That's not some anomaly in state government. Those relationships exist. There's a lot of state agencies that work together to realize economies of scale, and we'll talk even more about some of those within this same bodies.
If I might, first I apologize for running late. I was incarcerated someplace else. So what you're saying is not a matter that the costs are not, there's no cost to it. It's simply being shown up on somebody else's cost sheet?
Unlikely, without being able to dig into all of them specifically, what the true cost of any of those categories might not be. And you'll see on the next slide, I'm going to talk about adjustments we made. We could capture that. In the amount of time we had, we were able to get some information and make some of those adjustments. Some of them, right, we could identify, the longer we look, we go, hey, there's probably some cost here, but it's not captured in the current time. Somebody bears that cost. There's always somebody that bears the cost of the expenses. It's just who and at what level do we want to get into. With the amount of time we had, we were able to make some adjustments. In other areas, we weren't able to make those adjustments. That's just something for you to keep in mind as we move forward. So you can see on this slide, here's some quick captures of those adjustments, right? We were able to make personnel adjustments for IT with PEEHIP. We were able to make some adjustments for their office space. We were able to, because of the accounting system, we were able to try to right-size some of the accounting expenditures, get them in the same categories, move things that were categorized not as grants and benefits, those member benefits right in the right pool, get other things right in the administrative agency pools, the agency administrative pools. So the other key piece that you need to know about those adjustments, and we call them adjustments and allocations, but you'll see them all throughout as adjusted, and it encompasses both of those, is that SEIB operates programs where they do administrative operations for other state agencies. They receive administrative fees from those agencies for doing so. They, similar to that same relationship with PEEHIP and RSA, don't capture exactly where the expense of doing those functions occur. So in order to properly give them credit for services that aren't directly tied to the state employees insurance board, we allocated those revenues across all of their agency administrative expenses on a prorated basis. So when you adjust it, you get a new chart that looks like this one we're looking at there. And you might have saw it, you might not have, but we draw those lines and they're closer together. We're looking at somewhere in the $5 million agency administrative expenses once adjusted. We go back to that slide a couple slides ago where we looked at the differences and we make that same adjustment. You might not have noticed the change here, but the numbers changed on the far left and they changed a little bit on the far right. But now we're still talking about a tiny percentage, but that percentage has changed a little bit. It's down to about 1% of an agency, or 1% of total administration, total expenses for agency administration for SEIB, and about 0.4% for PEEHIP. The other piece that I want to talk about is we talked about looking at agency administration versus grants and benefits versus member benefits. Another way that we could talk about that is marginal dollars versus fixed dollars. And so to put that just as plainly as I can, fixed dollars do not move with enrollments the way that marginal dollars do, right? They're incurred cost that might fluctuate a little bit, but in general, they stay the same. If enrollments go down, you're still gonna have those fixed costs, and that's gonna affect what we're gonna do next in the next piece of it, and that's a per capita enrollment. When you look at these two agencies, and you can see 1.5 billion for one of them, 500 million for the other, those are pretty stark differences. We talked about it in the last meeting with terms of enrollment numbers. So the way that we can get those into comparable numbers is to do it on a per capita basis. So we took that and we looked at various metrics that we could do, and we decided to go with enrollments and contracts. Enrollments are, for all intents and purposes, contracts with members of the state. And this is a list of tables that shows you the level of detail that we would like to, that we could get to with more time. We could really break down the cost at each one of these levels. We could even go further into total lives covered. But for the purposes of the time that we had and giving you good quality information, we decided to take that at the total enrollment level. Here's why that's a good number. All of those numbers you see in that chart right there, and that's the top right on that page, those are state employees or former state employees that a state agency has at one time paid a monthly employer fee for. Right, so that's who we're talking about, that's where we're captured, and that's where these systems draw their base and their enrollments from. Whether dependents or everything, they tie back to those former or active state employees. We can take those enrollment numbers, we can divide them into the average expenditures, give us a cost per enrollment for each year, and then we can divide those by 6 to give us what our findings are. So that takes us to what those findings are. When we take those, the table on the left here, that's slide 11 for y'all that are trying to catch up with me. The total adjusted expenditures, and that is all encompassing. That's that fixed dollars and those marginal dollars. That's the breakdown of cost per enrollment. What you asked us to look at was the one on the right. That's the agency administrative expenses. So we take that, we make that an average cost on your next slide, and what we really asked us to do was, what's driving that difference?
Back up for a second. If I don't, yeah, not that far. Go back to the 11. There we go. I want to make sure that I think I understand what's being done here. I'm looking at the, there's two charts, I guess, on my left, enrollment per contract aspect. You're looking down on the 23, you've got a 4.3% change, and that's PEEHIP. And then on the SEIB, you've got a 13.1% change. Looking on the right, you've got total, evidently this reflective of totals, and again, on the 23, you've got a 3.7 PEEHIP, and then on the SEIB, 84.2%. Can you explain or talk about those numbers for just a moment, so that that looks extremely, while the left one looks telling, the one on the right looks almost out of whack. Can you tell me something about that?
I go back to this slide to start. The table on the left reflects all of this chart, right? The little tiny sliver of a bar and the big long bars. So when you have 99% of your cost in that marginal character, that's going to move with your enrollments It's going to have a lot less fluctuation. We've heard in previous meetings about the driving cost of pharmacy benefits, retirees, whatever it is. That's going to drive that number, and that's going to drive that table on the left. The table on the right was just those little slivers, just those little tiny fractions. So there's a couple of factors that could go into the table on the right, and if I can come back and answer that question after I talk about the drivers, I would.
All right, I'll sit down, shut up, go ahead.
All right, so this is that, right? This is what we're focused in on, is what that difference is and what's driving that. So first and foremost, it's personnel, it's salary and benefits. Over 60% of that difference on the slide before is made up of salary and benefits. You can see we can remove the administrative personnel piece of that because we didn't have that cost from PEEHIP, so we can take that out. So we're looking again to apples and apples, and you can see some of the differences here. What's driving those differences are largely numbers of personnel, right? You can look on the far right, and yes, there is some differences in average salaries broken down, but what's actually driving the full cost there is the number of FTEs for an agency that is operating with 3 times less enrollments than one that's operating larger. So roughly the same FTEs year over year. Some decline for SEIB from 18 to 23, some increase for PEEHIP from 18 to 23 along those lines. But that's where that big driver is. The other piece of this is...
But let me ask this. Now, you talked in a previous aspect of where the costs are not being reflected in PEEHIP, and they are reflected in SEIB. Is that this issue? Is that a factor this here? Simply because has that been adjusted out or given credence for it, or is that the problem or issue?
So when we just look at the personnel piece and we remove that administrative personnel, all right, then we are looking much closer at what the actual cost is, and that's classifications that they gave us. We had to do some ACEs categories, and we created basically a group called member relations, which we said.
So you did some adjustments.
We did some classifications on that end. We did do some adjustments. You might have seen from the adjustment side, personnel expenditures. It was told to us early on that IT personnel for PEEHIP was likely understated for years 18 through 22, so they'd adjusted it up in 23. But there's some other differences here that I can't answer your question directly because we just didn't have the time to get into all of the minutia.
Okay.
All right, but there's some things that you need to know is like, let's take a look at legal on this chart. For 18 through 23, SEIB or PEEHIP has had 1 FTE legal allocated to PEEHIP costs. Well, they shared with us their 2024 budget and their 2025 budget, and we talked about it. Well, they've removed that FTE from their expenditures because, in their opinion, they don't need a full-time FTE. So because of that relationship with RSA, or the retirement systems, that cost can be borne by a different agency, and they can go get legal services when they need it from RSA. So that's an economy that is realized for that relationship. Now, in future years, that'll be an unaccounted for cost at whatever it is, unless some changes are done in the accounting methods. But it's still not going to amount to the significant cost driver that it would need to be to bring that gap any closer, right? You can't have 1/3 of the enrollments and have roughly the equivalent, the equal FTEs, right? You would have to drastically increase FTEs for PEEHIP to get those numbers closer together. Do I right in answering that question?
I think so. I guess is PEEHIP reflecting other FTEs? Are these FTEs being reflected, if you will, on RSA line rather than the other? Is that the difference here?
That's not the difference, no.
Okay.
No, that's right. There is some amount of the difference that's captured in that cost that is bore by RSA for PEEHIP.
All right.
But I would say that, again, that's a significant hurdle 60% of that gap. Remember, 60% of that gap is made up in personnel. So you'd have to make up quite a bit of salary and benefit expense to capture that level of difference. So the next is this group of 5 categories, and this is 30% of the remaining costs. We captured 60 with salary and benefits, and you got 30. So between those 2 slides, I'm giving you 90% of that difference. And some of this is just operational decision making. This is the way that these agencies have chosen to go and operate their programs, their plans, and you get some of that in here. Others is economies that are realized. Again, that relationship. We've adjusted the leasehold for both agencies in this chart. You've got a estimated cost for PEEHIP. We've also removed rentals from the Wellness Center, which we classified as a member benefit from SEIB, right? But there's likely some economies realized by PEEHIP from that relationship in here. Again, fractional, marginal, but there are some. Data processing equipment is probably one of the easiest ones to point out. And that's computers, and they said that RSA owns the computers and they lease the computers. Again, that's a good business model. Plenty of agencies, organizations, private sector, public sector could utilize that same model. And again, that cost is not so much that it's going to make up the difference. Those are 90% of your drivers. The other piece that you asked us specifically to look at were overlaps. And I've talked several times about economies, whether they're realized or not, whether they are going to be. And here is that last kind of option for some of those economies. And these are services that are paid, services or fees that are paid by these agencies each and every year at some level that are actually fairly comparable at a dollar level. But they pay the same vendors for the same category or at detailed level expenditure. And if you could operationalize the whole and share in some of that expense, you could reduce the expense to the state, reduce the expense for each of these agencies in that area. That's all I have on the overview. You have a lot of detail information in there. I'm here to answer questions about the slides or the detail at your disposal.
The details are in the thicker pad.
The details are in the 91 pages.
Okay. Any questions from anybody? All that was clear to everyone other than me? Let me,
Mr. Chairman, let me.
yes, sir, go ahead.
I've got several notes here on the big package. And not to be redundant, I realize that the operational scope of work is different in the 2 agencies. I get that. But just for example, marketing and communications under SEIB. So where does PEEHIP capture their marketing and communications? What does that translate to in PEEHIP?
We stopped short of every individual personnel piece, and we took the classifications they gave us. Some of them were easy to go: IT, legal, administrative, accounting, and then we had those other ones that are sort of, as we said, member relations, right? They have certain things. Both of these programs operate a wellness program. Both of them have advisors that speak to members. Both of them have some level of marketing and that outreach. I think in order to really get into the detail that you want, we would have to get in and actually go and watch those people perform the jobs and go, these are similar jobs, because the classifications stop at some point. It's what they've chosen to bucket them or call them. And it could be, right, that marketing and communications could easily be in enrollments at RS or at PEEHIP.
Is there somebody here that can answer that? I mean, that's pretty significant, $386,000 on the SEIB. What does that include, marketing and communication?
Yes, the marketing for the State Employees Insurance Board, this is a staff that they're actually paid on commission, okay? There we have what we call supplemental and optional plans. Both programs do. The teachers, I think, have had it back in the 80s, maybe even before the 80s. We did not get legislative authority to provide those type of benefits until 2006. I think even in the documents here, and PEEHIP can speak to it, but I think they are running around 15% of their population are in those lower cost plans. That saves the state a lot of money. We have been chasing that level of participation in those type of programs now for 15 years, ever since we got the legislative authority to put these programs in place. Our percentage continues to increase, but I think the last time I looked at it, we're still only around 7 to 8% of our population are in those programs. But these marketing folks are out there meeting with the employees and trying to identify what's plan is best for them and get them enrolled in these supplementals, because they basically cost about 20 cents on the dollar. So the more folks we have in those programs, the more money the state is able to save. It's cost us, you got the number in front of you, 400 and something.
Just shy of that.
Okay, but how we pay for that is through our flex contributions, okay? Under the flex contributions for healthcare reimbursement accounts and dependent care reimbursement accounts, these are member contributions that are put into these accounts, and they're put in pre-tax. The state is not paying any FICA tax on that. So we save a little over $1 million on FICA tax. We in turn use that money to pay for these marketing folks. I know that the last I looked, I think we were out 32% of our employees participate in those pre-tax programs, which is extremely high compared to most groups. I mean, the norm, without a whole lot of marketing and communication, you would find groups running around 10% participation levels. If you're just sending out written communications, advertising the program, you might get to 15%, 20%. We're running 32%. So we use that money, the savings, about half of it, the savings to the state, to pay for that marketing team.
Okay, thank you. So how are we capturing that service to the employees on the education side through PEEHIP?
Representative Reynolds, we don't market like that per se. What we do is we have, and it depends on your categories, because even though we're the same plan, we do things a little differently and they're categorized a little bit differently. So we don't have marketing. What we do have is we have handbooks that we print and we send out. We have a community.
And is that captured in your member services?
Yes,
line?
it's captured in one of these buckets. I'm not exactly sure. Patrick will have to help me with that. But yes, handbooks. And our communications office helps do that along with the PEEHIP staff. We have field services that when they go out and do retirement seminars, they also talk with people about PEEHIP and what their options are and counsel them on what might work best for them. We have member services, which is the call-in. When you call in that 1-800 number, they're the first people to talk with you. And certainly they talk with you about PEEHIP. But I don't know that we would call it marketing. It's more of education of what we have and what you need when you need counseling about your benefits that you have. So we don't have a plan like that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I've got, Mr. Chairman. That was just one example of several categories that I was seeing a difference there, and it was pretty significant. So just trying to understand how PEEHIP does it through their execution of their plan versus SEIB.
Good talk. Good question, Mr. Chairman. I will say this. It seems clear to me, not just from this, but also in conversations, that we're trying to make a comparison of where that's difficult to do. You have two particular insurance programs functioning in very different ways, conducting business in very different ways. And it's hard to make a comparison when one has a program and one doesn't have a program, or they do it differently, or the accounting is different. That's one thing I've learned from this lightning quick job that Patrick and Marcus have done is that it's difficult to make a comparison when you don't have comparative methods to see. They don't line up. Trying to put a Ford part on a Dodge. So I'm not sure what the answer is in regard to that completely. Any other questions that we got?
I need to
Go ahead, William.
ask Patrick, first of all, outstanding job in the short period of time, because I know the amount of data, that's the first time in my 37 years of running the program, I've seen that much data, in comparison. So thank you for the data. I do have two things that I would ask that you check on for us within the report. On the enrollment, let's see, you've got, I think, around 53,000, over 53,000 employees, and our data is showing that it's closer to just under 56,000, and it looks to me like there's one of the categories of opt-outs did not get included. So if you could check on that for us, because that will change the denominator to a lot of these equations that you have. And then the second thing I would ask that you check into is, I was trying to track, and I've only looked at the fiscal year 2023. I have not had a chance to look at the others, but in 2023, there appears to be what we call our member contributions to the flex programs. There's about 18.5 million that's in our expenses for those type of expenditures. So they're really not expenditures. We're simply getting the member contribution, but then the comptroller has to cut a check and send it to our vendor to put into the member's account. So if you could check on those two items for us.
So those would be under the grants and benefits
Yes.
portion, and it's the same, Flex is done the same way with PEEHIP, so they are still comparable.
Well,
on the
it's
grants and benefits side.
yes and no. It depends on, because again, as I said earlier, we're running 32% participation level. I think I looked at some, and PEEHIP can answer for it, but their percentage was substantially less. But yet the average contribution to these programs is about the same. So we have a large amount of member contributions that are showing up compared, I think, what you're going to find on the PEEHIP side. So if I'm asking is that you take a look at that, because that's really not an expenditure. And if we're going to consider it an expenditure, then it's not making any sense from my standpoint to go out there and try to get more participation in these pre-tax programs, which actually save the state money and then save the members substantially amount of money on their taxes. So to me, that would be, and it should be adjusted on both sides. I think whatever the number is on PEEHIP side should be adjusted out of their cost, just like it should be adjusted out of our cost. Because in looking at fiscal year 2023, when you make that adjustment along with the enrollment adjustment, it looks to me like our costs are running about 8.1% more than the teachers program, which would be consistent with the presentation we heard from Blue Cross, that our cost, because of the increased risk of the population, should be in the neighborhood of 8%. So I think once you make those adjustments, everything starts to line back up. So all I'm asking is take a look at that before we make any final report that gets published. Okay?
Certainly will do. Take a look at the opt-outs and account for that if necessary. But just so we're clear to the members, the member benefits of those flex programs would be coming out of the marginal dollars in here. It's going to move fairly consistently. Yes, it'll bring the cost per enrollment down some fractional amount, but it's going to come off of both sides, and it's going to be a marginal cost.
If I might, some takeaways that I'm having from this, if I might. I've gone through this a couple of times, and I appreciate you sending this out. I think most everybody got this last Friday for their review. I looked through it Friday and Saturday, so let me tell you where my focus has been along this line. Whether that's important or not is immaterial, but I'm going to your slide 11. Again, talking about the annual adjusted cost per enrollment being, as you mentioned, the contracts. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And you're using that as a means so that we could have some commonality between comparisons there. So I'm looking on the left side, where it talks about per enrollment contract, and we're looking at the percent change on PEEHIP of 4.3%, running from 2018 of 7,525 up to 78,000 $7,851, 4.3% increase. On the SEIB side, we're running from 18, starting with 8,177, up to 9,251, which is a 13.1% increase. That's not just a percentage change, but it's a dollar change. Then we look to the right of that, the numbers are even more graphic. We're running from 2018, and this is adjusted figures, administrative personnel per contract, comparison personnel with contract cost, I guess. Is that accurate? Okay. So in 2018 with PEEHIP, we started out at $26.33, and in 23 we have a $27.31 with some variances there, with a high being of 31.48 and a low being the 26.33. And then with the SEIB, we started at 72.19, significantly higher, and we end up at 132.98 cents. That's an 84.2% increase. And that 82.4% is a comparison, as they are, from the 2018, the top of that column, to the bottom of that column. So that's not a 3.4 compared to an 84.2 necessarily. That's a 72 compared to a 132. Is that fact? Is that, am I accurate? So all of it's gone up. But with PEEHIP, they've been successful in keeping the cost into single digits as far as percentage change. And with SEIB, we're into double digits and approaching triple digits along that line. I'm concerned with that. One of our main priorities,
Mr. Chairman, can I just for
Certainly,
clarification before we move forward? But
please.
But that rate is less because, I mean, PEEHIP's got almost 56,000 more contracts, right? I mean, we're delivering that service to the employee, but that significant difference is because of the larger workforce and retirees, right?
Yeah, it's over 130,000 more contracts.
130,000, okay.
So it's triple the number.
Yeah, so
that's true.
Percentages are going to be higher, right?
Well, maybe, but even if you did that, 27 times 3 is still a lot less than 132.
Okay.
And I know, again, the problem is we're trying to compare things that are difficult to compare.
Right.
My whole purpose in pursuing this is to try to maintain a parity in services and in cost to our members and also to the state. The insurance groups, y'all got to worry about the members that you cover. I've got to worry about the members that you cover, and we also got to concern ourselves with our taxpayers too. So my question to you, Mr. Dean, under the circumstances we're in, can we continue parity of services and costs under the existing conditions that we are functioning under right now?
I don't know
It
that
may be an unfair on-the-spot thing, but
Yeah.
welcome to my world.
I would start by saying I don't know that it's my position to offer what I would consider to be a policy decision. Now, from a business standpoint, I would say that these two things could be a lot closer together, right? And I gave you the cost drivers behind that difference. We certainly could dig in longer. I don't know how much more fruit you would get to getting those numbers closer by trying to really understand whether marketing is a bigger driver here or what the cost. I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about a 4 times cost difference. So you have to make up quite a bit of expense to draw those. So if this body were to say that you can't continue to have that difference in the cost, then I would say look to those drivers to start trying to bring them closer in line.
Doreen, did you have a comment?
I did. Hey, Pat.
You looked at me like you were going to say something.
Some of the things I think you guys have found related to the administrative costs, I wanted to see if you could touch back on them, just so that we're all clear. Let's go back to chart 11 on your page 11 that we're looking at, but also the total expenditures per enrollment. The left-hand side, that's administrative expenses and the grants and benefits that are paid out for claims. That's everything divided by the number of contracts. The right side is just the administrative cost that you guys tried to find parity in.
That's
Like you added some things that PEEHIP didn't normally consider in their costs, like you added additional costs there, so that would be parity. So the right side is like what you would consider apples to apples for administrative cost divided by the number of bodies covered.
I would stop short of apples to apples only because we've talked about it with these groups routinely. We'd call it apples to oranges. All right, we still got a little bit more to get to the same fruit tree, but we're probably in the same orchard.
Okay.
There's some, yes, we did, and I talked about that on here, and I'll draw your attention to that. It's the third line down on the white. It's the IT for PEEHIP. All right, they had one IT FTE allocated for 2018 through 22, and they right-sized in 23. Well, we were able to take that number in 23 and back into a number for all of those years, which is reflected in these charts, and it's reflected in the adjusted cost on your charts in the detail. So we're able to do that. We're able to take what the actual RSA leasehold space is for the space that PEEHIP consumes within that building and go, this is what that cost would be. And that is seen at the top of this chart. So we're able to make some of those adjustments on a lot of the driving categories to get that parity that you're talking about. There are certainly some other ones, but I go back to 4 times the difference. You've got to make some pretty significant swings to cut into.
And some of those economies of scale, I mean, that's a good thing, right? Like we want to see that. We see that in other ways of government. The Attorney General's office has an attorney that may work for 15 or 20 licensure boards because we don't want every licensure board to get in a separate attorney. So there's some good economies of scale there that clearly PEEHIP gets to recognize because they're part of a bigger picture of RSA, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, economies of scale are always a good thing. You see it with PEEHIP. You actually even see it with programs that SEIB administers for other states. You see it with whether it's the risk management pool for finance where they don't charge a fee there. There's economies that are realized when state agencies start acting as a team and working together on how to keep costs lower and deliver the ultimate benefits to the taxpayers of Alabama.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mackey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you take out the relationship between SEIB and PEEHIP, just say the PEEHIP column's not there, what were the drivers that caused those costs? I'm looking at this chart on 11 on the very far right column that went up 84% from $72 to $132. And in my mind, I'm thinking, so if it's administrative cost but doesn't include any personnel, I would think most of the costs are personnel. So relative to that, you know, when you had that long bar and it just had the tiny little piece at the end, so relative to that, this is a much smaller sliver, I guess. So this is the administrative cost, but not including any administrative personnel.
Just administrative personnel. And yes, so you go to this slide right here. If you have to watch the transition here, it's on slide 13. But what we've done in that table that you're looking at is we've removed that bottom line.
Okay.
So it's there to there. You're seeing it without that bottom line. And every other cost is captured on the agency administrative.
Right, okay. So then back to was there a particular driver that drove up those costs that you saw?
Yeah, there is actually. There's 2 sort of drivers. You've heard Mr. Ashmore talk about this in previous. There's been some declining enrollments. You can see that. Uh-oh. Can you reset that for me? Enrollments have declined a little bit for SEIB. All right, you can see it goes from 53,808 to 53,249. That's a 1% decline. But the bigger driver here is those revenues that were allocated. So I talked about those earlier on here, but in 2018, that was $4.3 million in revenues that they were receiving from other agencies that was allocated against their administrative expenses. So that really pushed their agency administrative expenses lower. And then that declined from 4.3 million in 2018 to 1.5 million in 2023.
Yeah.
So when you do that, that's a 65% decline in revenues, additional revenues that they were receiving to perform a function, and that is without right sizing. When you lose those revenues, which are presumably for an administrative function provided for somebody else, that goes back to the fixed dollars. All right, when should you see the swings in fixed dollars? When you see that sort of capacity leave your organization, you've got to make some right sizing, some changes to get those fixed dollars back to what they are. And that's a byproduct of business decisions, but it's also a byproduct of not tracking those expenditures at the detail in which these are the things that were attributed to those revenues, and these are the things that need to come down with it.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Yes,
on the personnel, though, because that is the biggest expense of the agency. And you're absolutely right. It was the local government plan that we administered for years and years. They created their own board. And then over a period of time since 2015, they slowly moved out, and 3 years ago became an independent agency. So that revenue that was coming in was not only covering the cost, but we were actually making money off of that because we charged them a 2% administrative fee. But as far as the actual cost, if you look at page 14, and maybe this answers some of the questions, because you look at all these ratios and all, and a lot of that are changing drastically because of whether it be lost revenues from these other plans that we administered, or changes in the actual enrollment that you are using as the denominator here. But as far as the total amount, you look at on page 11, bottom left corner there. In 2018, we spent basically $3.3 million. By 2023, it had gone up to $3.7 million. So you're looking at about a $400,000 increase in the actual expense. Everything else is a matter of lost revenue, you've got your enrollment changes, and it gives you the big percentages.
Large percentage, but small amount of cash, is that what you're saying?
It's a small amount, and as Patrick said, I think Patrick, after all your adjustments and all, I heard earlier that the administrative costs, we're talking about 1% as a percentage of the overall.
After adjustments, that's correct.
Yeah. So all of this, what we're talking about, really boils down to it's 1% of what we do. It's important. Don't get me wrong, but it's when you look at the actual dollars, it's not a big number in comparison to what's going on with the whole program. And one other thing, just because you did bring it up, back to the left-hand side, this is what I was asking Patrick to look into. That number that you see for us at $9,251, I'm asking that we go back and look at two things. One is the enrollment. I think there's about 2,600 people that are missing there. And then there's also about 18.5 million that are for member contributions that are included in these expenses. You adjust that, and that number is going to fall back to somewhere around 8,500. It's still more than what you see on the PEEHIP side. And there'll be some adjustments even on the PEEHIP side too, because they're going to have some of the member contributions. I don't know that it's going to be as large as our number, but the difference is going to come back, and it's going to be close to that 8%, which again, Blue Cross had in their presentation said, because of the risk factors, you're looking at about an 8% difference in the overall cost.
Which brings up a question I have, Patrick. We seem to be having some argument over accounting issues. Who paid what and who did this and who. Where did you get your numbers from?
From the statewide governmental accounting system. So both agencies were, like I said before, they did a great job of giving us a lot of information in a short period of time. When we got into it, right, whether it's they count things in the same category, whether they call them something different. So at the end, we just went straight to, as we would call it, the source data, and we used that system, which has a chart of accounts that we follow, and that's where you see objects and object categories on there. All of that is expenditure level detail. It's a bucket.
Could that explain the differences of the numbers that Mr. Ashmore's speaking of?
No, what he's talking about is actual enrollment numbers. So you add 2,600 to that 53,000, you get it up to 56,000. So then you divide that annual number or that 2023 number of 494,000 or 9,146,100,000, divide that by increase the denominator to 56.
I got you.
And it'll raise that total expense down, particularly when you're looking at the whole. If you take out the flex benefit dollars expended there, then you take that out and then you'll bring it down some more. It's the table on the right that, again, you can change that enrollment number. You got to change that enrollment number quite a bit. And I'm all for corrections. If something's not right, let's get it right. Let's make our decisions based off of the best and accurate information. So I will gladly look into that and make sure that y'all have updated numbers. But we're not significantly changing that number.
Okay. Let's get into, if we can take just a few minutes, I'd like to have a couple of discussions, if I might, thoughts, maybe discussions too broad a term. I'd like to get some thoughts on this. As we said, we're trying to make comparisons, not apples and oranges. I like to think Dodge and Ford. But anyway, it's difficult to make comparisons along this line because they are completely separate. They do completely different things. They call the same thing by different names and other matters such as that. That makes it hard for anyone of my education to sort through that stuff. So that's one question. Should we do something to bring this in closer proximity so that we could actually have a valid exercise in looking at it? That's number one. Number two, both agencies, or both entities, I'll say it that way, are doing things, their business, their way. Now that's fine if you're a separate business, but both are functions of the state of Alabama. The question is, and both are serving employees of the state of Alabama, whether they're employees of the state or employees of the education system. So the question is, which one of the two systems is a better system? Or do they both function better by doing things separately? Now, that's just my thoughts. Anyone have any thoughts along that line?
Mr. Chairman, if you will, so I've had 3 questions written down in my notebook every time we've met. And the questions are this: does a potential merger of these boards reduce the cost of benefits to the employee or retiree? And I think the answer is no, right? We're getting the maximum scale on our pricing for our insurance policies as it is. Number 2, are we gaining efficiency on how we deliver health insurance to our employees and retirees? I don't think we are, because of the separate organizations. I mean, they're experts in their area. And I do know both are talking about health insurance, but clearly that they're handled differently, both for the, and I did say 56,000 employees a while ago. I was looking at the full-time contracts, not the total number, so I apologize for that. And then lastly, could a merger of these two boards decrease support to our employees and retirees? And I suggest it could. It could. I know that a lot of employees and a lot of retirees have a lot of questions related to their plans. It's an ongoing process. I know both these agencies work very hard but it could slow response to our workforce. And certainly during these times of challenging workforce and trying to keep our numbers up here we're seeing the annual enrollment there. Actually, I see that on the state employee side, back up to 53,249. So we're actually kind of gaining some ground there from where we've been. So that's just where I come from there. And I guess being a public employee for 35 years and dealing with these issues, it's certainly nice to have somebody pick up the phone and call. They know my plan, they understand the plan, and they can answer my concerns.
Any other comments, questions? None? So it sounds like, are we headed towards status quo? Has this exercise been worthwhile? Let me ask that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, it's definitely been worthwhile because I think we've learned a lot about the system. And, as I mentioned the first meeting, I'm in a hybrid world here because my employees at the State Department are on SEIB. Our employees who work for our local LEAs are on PEEHIP. So I've gotten a lot of calls, comments, and things like that. And in general, people who've called me or commented when I've been out visiting schools or something, this is where I'm going with this. They have not asked anything about this study commission or the work that the chairs have undertaken or the cost benefit or anything. They hope that there's nothing coming out that's going to reduce their benefits. And so the thing I would like to say is that it still is, as a state agency head and in our schools, our really high quality insurance and retirement systems are our best recruiting tool. And so I have tried my message has been, we're looking at administrative costs, we're looking at organization. Nobody is talking about taking away your insurance, reducing your benefits, and those kind of things. So I think it has been worthwhile, but I don't know, to Chairman Reynolds' position, I don't know if we've seen, when you start combining, we all know there are headaches combined in combining. It's probably not a good way to say that. And so you have to look at what the cost benefit would be. I'm not the person that could say that. I thought Patrick did a great job bringing this, and again, thank you, but it's really a lot of information put together and to digest in a short amount of time. And I do not have the expertise to tell you if you keep two separate plans, and two separate boards, but you combine administrative and you save on some legal fees and those kind of things. But I don't feel like I have the expertise to say in the end, would that save the state 0.25%, 0.5%, 1%? But I do think we want to send a clear message that we're committed to a strong health care program for all of our employees. And as far as the other, I'm not trying to get out of it. I just don't feel like I have the expertise to say, oh yeah, we ought to combine or we ought to not combine. I just don't live in that world enough to understand it to that level.
Let me say this, if I might. The aspect that, and when we first started this, I made the comment that this is not a foregone conclusion. This is not driving this wagon into consolidation, all right? I think timing of that is wrong. I don't think we have, as the chairman has said, we don't have enough data to substantively make that decision and to take that step. I think that would be an error. As I say, slicing steak with a 9-pound sledge, it would not have a very good outcome. I think that we are unprepared for that. But I do suggest this. I do suggest that we can find, as someone has said here earlier, economies of scale. We can find some ways to bring these entities closer into operational status with one another. We are talking about our employees. In your case, Dr. Mackey, you got both. One of the few people that have that. I would like to see if there is some way, and I'm turning to you guys because y'all are the experts, to find some way that we can bring some better understanding, as to who's paying for what. Trying to get a better accounting so that novices like myself can understand who's paying for what and how much that is. We can't make a decision as to how to keep this on par without having that information and without having that information understood. Even today, and I know I put my folks, Marcus and Patrick, on a very short leash as far as time is concerned, but they rose to the challenge. And even though there may be some issues of arguments of particular numbers, I think we see the real problem is, how do we evaluate it? Is there ways we can do things that could bring this into a better evaluation mode rather than, as the chairman said, a consolidation mode? Is there a way that we can find economies that would be substantive, that would be worthwhile? Our goal here is to keep the best insurance programs for all our people so that all of them can have a good coverage and not rob from each other. Okay? Dr. Mackey doesn't want one of them moving from one office to the other office so we can change insurance plans because it's cheaper or it's better. Is there a way we can do that? Is there a way we can bring some substantive changes along this line so that we can have a better evaluation? I'm not talking about consolidation of boards. I'm not talking about elimination of boards. I'm talking about a means where you experts can find a way that you can explain to novices like myself who's paying what and how much. Does that make sense? Now, who's going to do that? My goal, if we're going to make changes, if there's going to be changes that needs to be done, we go into session in February. I'd like to see some of that if we're going to do it by that point. If we can, we're into November now. Should we get back together? Should we have some meetings between us or amongst us and try to nail some things down that we can look at to bring about some changes on this? And then get things ready so that we can be on one page on this rather than trying to fight a way to a game that we're not going to, i.e. consolidation. Does that make sense? When do you want to have the next meeting then? December 26th? No.
25th.
No. Before we go there, Miss Scott, you here? There you are. Could you come up for a moment? Now this seems a little bit harsh. I don't mean it to be, but I'm going to get this in the public domain if we could. I've been getting a few emails talking about how PEEHIP is short of money and that the legislature is not giving you the money that you need, or worse to that effect. I haven't seen that. I've just heard about it by several folks. Can you tell me what's going on there? Is your mic on?
PEEHIP has increased the employer contribution request for the upcoming session for fiscal year 26.
That the taxpayers need to put in, right?
Yes, and that the legislature approves.
Just like every other agency we hear from, but go ahead.
Yes, sir. But we have asked for an increase mainly due to the federal funding changes that we've talked about with this commission before. And there was an article in the advisor to members that they need to talk to the legislators now if that funding increase is important to them, because without it, the PEEHIP board will likely have to meet afterwards and discuss what plan changes they need to address shortfalls. You might just use my redneck on that. Go for it.
that's a shot across the bow of the legislature?
I don't think I'd term it that way, but
Okay.
Cost of doing business.
Cost of doing business? I would make note of a couple of items. Number one is in our latest numbers that we got, our ETF is down 10%. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
Demands, as I mentioned, are up. We appreciate your efforts. We appreciate your attention. This is not going to be an easy matter. I'll say it that way. We're headed towards some issues that, on both sides, ETF and general fund, that are not going to be pretty. So, thank you for the warning shot.
You're welcome.
We fired back.
We look forward to that during the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Having said that, where do we go from here? You want to have another meeting? January?
January 27? I'm just kidding. I think the Senator Orr and Garrett both were on the Zoom call watching this, and they've got some questions, and they're going to reach out to you directly about those questions. So,
Okay, good.
I say we kind of vet through this. You've asked for a couple of clarifications on the numbers. So let's see what we get back, and then set a date from there.
That'll be fine with me. Let's not set a date now. Let's figure out where we are. I'd hate to call a meeting and not have anything done.
Sure.
So let's see what we can start dealing with here along this line about developing something. So we've got to find out and have a better feel of who's paying what and how much that is. And you guys, the experts, have got to figure out how you're going to get that done. And hopefully along that way, we'll find out what other economies we can do. So we'll remain in touch and try to figure out when we can get back together. Is that all right? Any other comments or questions? None? I guess we'll stand adjourned. Thank y'all.
Thank you.